Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we've got week 3 of our power rankings. We've done one of these over the past 2 weeks, now we're doing another one here. A lot of updated power rankings that saw a couple of teams skyrocket and a couple of other teams fall flat on their faces. We'll touch on how the power rankings look after week 3 coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would narrow to the of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. So we are back here with another power rankings video. It's week 3, so as per usual, we'll do 3 honorable mentions, and then we'll do our top 10 power rankings. And there has been quite a shakeup in the top 10 after this week of NHL action. So don't forget to stay tuned until the end because there's a new number 1 in the NHL power rankings this week. So we're going to start off as usual with our 3 honorable mentions. There are 2 teams, Chicago and Toronto, who fell out of the honorable mentions, 2 new teams who went in. So we'll start with our 3rd honorable mention here, and that is the Los Angeles Kings. They had a really rocky start to the season, but over the past week, they have been flying. Last week, they went 3-0-1, getting 7 out of a possible 8 points. Sure, 2 of them were overtime wins, and one was an overtime loss, and then one was a narrow win over the Chicago Blackhawks. I get it. They still have only won 1 game in regulation, but they got 7 out of possible 8 points. They are looking pretty much a lot better than they were at the beginning of the season. The defense is looking a lot more sound, so I think it's only right to put them in the honorable mention category. Like, defensively, team's looking a little bit better with Ceci and Dumoulin and Doughty. Offensively, they're still clicking with Kempe and Kuzmenko and Byfield. Kopitar's back, which is good news. And it's not the worst in the world. Could be a little bit better, but still. Good things from the LA Kings. They had 7 possible 8 points last week. I think it's only right to put them as an honorable mention. The second honorable mention is the Edmonton Oilers. They also had a pretty solid week last week. They went 2-1-1. They wound up taking down the Montreal Canadiens in narrow fashion, 6-5, a game in which the refs really did help them at least a little bit. Then they were also able to take down the Senators at the beginning of the week, 3-2 in overtime. So it was an impressive win over at the time hurting Senators team. And then they also were able to end the week with 2 losses though. They did lose in regulation to the Seattle Kraken 3-2, and then lost in overtime to the Canucks 4-3. So I mean, you'd want to rather beat the Pacific teams, the division that you're in, rather than lose to the Pacific teams and beat the Atlantic division teams. But still, I think they'll take 5 out of possible 8 points. They're back up to 500. This is one of the best starts the Edmonton Oilers have had in recent memory, getting to 500 at the 10-game mark. So with all that in mind, with them having the winning record, not doing too shabby, only losing those 2 games by 1 goal, I think putting them as a second honorable mention team is pretty reasonable. Offensively, team's still looking good with Draisaitl, Mangiapane, Nugent Hopkins, McDavid. Defense looking all right with Ekholm, Bouchard, Nurse. And in net, they still have pretty decent goaltending with Skinner and Picard. So a solid week there from the Oilers as they're back into the honorable mentions. And then the first honorable mention is a team who was actually in the top 10 power rankings last week, but they do fall out, and that is the Detroit Red Wings. The Red Wings were, I think, in the top 5 I put them in last week, but they had a very sour week, which is why I'm moving them down to the honorable mentions. I might have been able to keep them in the top 10, but there were a couple other teams that I really need to put ahead of them, so they bumped them down to the honorable mentions. So very interesting out there. They went 1-2-0 last week, started out with a bad loss to the hurting Buffalo Sabres team. Then they got their butts whooped by the New York Islanders 7-2 before they finished off the week having to come back from 4-0 down just to beat the St. Louis Blues 6-4. So I'm not sure if that's an indication of how good Detroit is or how bad St. Louis is. So once again, because of all of the games that they played this week, I'm going to put them in honorable mentions. They're still one of the top teams in the Atlantic. Larkin, Finney, Raymond, DeBrincat also looking pretty good offensively. Defensively, Sherratt, Seider, Edmondson looking pretty good defensively in net. Talbot and Gibson could be a little bit better, but still, all in all, it's a decent record there for Detroit. They went 1-2-0, but they still have a winning record, and that's why I'm only bumping them down to the honorable mention category. So those are the 3 honorable mentions this week. Next, going over to my top 10 power rankings. So at 10th, and enter the power rankings for the first time this year, is the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins are now 6-2-1 this year after a 2-0-1 record last week. They wound up taking down the Florida Panthers. They took down another team, and they lost in a shootout to the Columbus Blue Jackets. So 5 out of possible 6 points ain't half bad. Before Monday's game action, Malkin and Crosby had combined for 25 points in just 9 games of NHL action. These two are turning the clock back, and they are looking like young Crosby and Malkin. So like, these two guys are leading this Penguins team. So getting 5 possible 6 points with the way Crosby and Malkin are killing it. I gotta put them in the top 10 at least for this week. Offensively, like we just said, Malkin and Crosby are doing great, as is guys like Raquel, Brazeau, Mantha. Defensively could be a little bit better, but still, Letang, Carlson, Shea doing pretty good defensively, and Annette, Jarry, and ST.L also giving them some pretty decent goaltending. So all in all, decent week from the Penguins, going 2-0-1. I have them as 10th team in my power rankings. 9th team in my power rankings, and staying there from last week, is the Dallas Stars. I did contemplate putting them up a little bit higher this week after a solid week from them, but I'm going to keep them in the 9th spot this week. They went 2-1-1 last week. They got a big win, including against the Carolina Hurricanes. I think they also beat the Nashville Predators, had a loss in there. They also lost in overtime to Los Angeles Kings, which wasn't overly good, but 5 out of possible 8 points. They ended their losing streak, which was huge, and they're right back into the thick of it for the Central Division. Like, that was a pretty solid week from the Stars and a really good bounce back week after not winning a game the previous week. So very good stuff there for the Dallas Stars. And offensively, team's still looking pretty good. Rantanen, Robertson, Hintz, Johnston. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Heiskanen, with Lundqvist, with Harley. And in net, they still have a pretty solid goalie in Onger. So very interesting note there. But even though Dallas had a winning record, 5 possible 8 points, I'm keeping them as the 9th team in my power rankings. The 8th team in my power rankings, falling a little bit from last week, is the Vegas Golden Knights. The Knights, who were on a season opening point streak, had come to a close last week as they lost in regulation to the Florida Panthers, getting shut out by them. They also got points against Tampa in a game they probably shouldn't have gotten a point in. And they also ended the Carolina Hurricanes win streak by beating them to start the week. So they went 1-1-1. Not a terrible record. They're at 500, but it's not the record that I was hoping for the Vegas Golden Knights this year. I know they're beat to heck with some of these injuries, but still. The offense is looking good with guys like Smith and Carlson, Stone, Eichel. All those guys are looking pretty good. Defensively, Whitecloud, Hannafin, Theodore, all looking pretty good as well. And in net, at this point, Lindblom and Schmid have done all right in net with Hill injured right now. So once again, they're injured. They're not doing overly great, but a 1-1-1 record only drops them a couple of spots from last week. The Thurman's team, once again, in the power rankings this week, is the Seattle Kraken. The Kraken had another phenomenal week. Not as good as last week, but they went 2-2-0. Started the week with back-to-back losses to the Flyers and the Capitals. Wasn't looking overly good, but they were a pretty banged-up team. Later on in the week, they got a couple of big pieces back. Mason Marchment got back. Brandon Montour returned from his leave of absence. And they went out taking down the Jets and the Oilers. So really good wins to finish out the week. Not overly great to see them go 2-2-0, but they're still 5-2-2 in a team who I was expecting to be one of the worst teams in the entire NHL. So I think, at least for this week, I gotta keep them in the top 10. Like, this team is just looking fantastic right now. Offensively, Schwartz, Eberle, Beniers, Karche, all looking really good offensively. Defensively, Larson, Dunn, Oleksiak doing pretty good defensively, and then Decord. Decord has been phenomenal for the Seattle Kraken, and then Grubauer and Murray have also looked pretty good. So really good stuff there from the Kraken, but after going 2-2-0 last week and just keeping them at the 7th spot in my power rankings, the 6th spot in my power rankings is the Winnipeg Jets. Just like the Seattle Kraken, they went 2-2-0, so they're up to a 6-3-0 record. But the teams who they won and lost against were not overly great. They lost the Seattle Kraken and the Utah Mammoth, two of the surprise teams so far in the Western Conference. Well, they only beat the Calgary Flames, who at the time are on an extreme losing streak. So, like, you're expecting them to beat Calgary, but not to beat Seattle or Utah, or at least get a point out of them, is not very convincing there for the Jets. So that's why I am bumping them down just a couple of spots from last week. But still, they're a pretty good team, one of the top teams in the Central Division. Offensively, team still cooking with Scheifele and Connor, Velarde, Iafallo. Defensively, looking pretty good with Morrissey and Namelo and Pionk, and in net, Hellbuck still being Hellbuck. So all in all, it wasn't a bad week from the Winnipeg Jets, and those losses were close, but it's just not good enough, in my opinion, to remain in the top 5. So Winnipeg falls to 6. And now going to the top 5 teams in the power rankings this week. So the 5th team is actually last week's number 1. That is the Colorado Avalanche. Now the Avalanche extended their season opening point streak to 8 games, and actually had 3 of their 4 games last week. So you'd expect them to be a little bit higher than this, and maybe even stay in the top spot. But they didn't win a singular game last week. They went 0-1-3, lost in overtime to Utah. They lost in extra time to another team. They lost in overtime to Jersey. They had their season opening point streak ended by the Boston Bruins. So once again, these were all really close games. Every single game was 1 goal, which is why I'm not going to bump them down too far. I think 5th is probably reasonable, but they didn't win a single game last week. So there was no way I was going to keep that team at first spot in the power rankings this week. Like, offensively, they're still looking pretty good. McKinnon, Landeskog, Nelson. Defensively, not looking too shabby with McCarr, Tays, Manson. And in net, Wedgwood, well, he had a little bit of a sour stretch over this past week. It's still looking like a pretty decent goaltender. So very interesting note there. But after going winless this past week, the Avalanche fall at number 5. The number 4 team was actually a team who was in the honorable mentions last week, but skyrocketed after another dominant week. And that is the Utah Mammoth. The Mammoth currently lead the entire Central and Pacific Division in points. They went 4-0 last week, including taking down the other 2 top Central Division teams and the Winnipeg Jets, the Colorado Avalanche. Like, they were on fire last week. Logan Cooley's looking good on the 4 group. So is Nick Schmalz. So is Clayton Keller. So is JG Paterka. So is Dylan Gunther. Defensively, Sergachev, Simashev, Marino, all looking really good defensively. In net, Vejmelka and Vanacek have been doing pretty good in net. Well, they could have done a little bit better over the past week, but they took down some of the top teams in the Central Division. They're one of the best goal scoring teams. They're up to an 8-2-0 record. So, while I'm not putting them in the top 3 yet, they are going to be put in the top 4, so very interesting note there. The 3rd team in power rankings is the last team who was undefeated up until this week, and that is the Carolina Hurricanes. They dropped 1 spot from last week, not too far. They went 1-2-0 last week. They wound up having their win streak ended by the Vegas Golden Knights before they took down the Colorado Avalanche as the Hartford Whalers in overtime, actually in a shootout 5-4, and then they wound up losing to the Dallas Stars to end the week 3-2. So once again, Dallas and Vegas are really good teams. So even if you're going to lose to them, I wouldn't take too much points away from the Canes losing to the Dallas Stars and the Vegas Golden Knights. And they did take down the Quebec Nordiques / Colorado Avalanche as well. So once again, I don't think they had a bad week. I just think there were a couple other teams who had a better week, and they're down to 6-2-0 on the year. So once again, I think they're a pretty good team, and I think they'll bounce back. But lost the first 2 games of the week, so that definitely has to bring them down at least a little bit. Offensively, teams still looking pretty good. Aho, Jarvis, Ehlers, Martinic looking pretty good offensively. Defensively, Walker, Gossesbear, and Nikishin all looking pretty good defensively. And in net, you've also got Anderson and Boosie still looking pretty good. So all in all, very interesting note there. But the Hurricanes do go 1-2-0 last week, which was the 3rd spot. The 2nd team in power rankings is the Montreal Canadiens. This team was on fire last week again. They wound up going 3-1-0, including a West Canadian road trip in which they wound up taking down the Calgary Flames to win in overtime, narrowly lost to the Edmonton Oilers, and then they took down the Vancouver Canucks in comfort behind fashion 4-3. So once again, the Montreal Canadiens were a firepower of a team last week. They looked fantastic. And they also took down the Buffalo Sabres. So very interesting note there, but the Montreal Canadiens went 3-1-0 last week. They're up to a 7-3-0 record. This team is just clicking on all cylinders. Offensively, Suzuki, Slavkovsky, Demidov, Newhook, all looking really good offensively. Defensively, team's looking pretty good with guys like Matheson and Dobson, and in net, Montembeault and Dobesh have both been doing pretty dang good in net. So all in all, very good stuff there from the Montreal Canadiens, but they are looking really good right now, one of the top teams in the league. That's why they're going 2nd in the power rankings. And the top team in the power rankings this week, the New Jersey Devils. They went 4-0-0 last week, getting up to an 8-1-0 record. This team was clicking on all gosh dang cylinders. Jack Hughes looking good offensively, as well as Timo Meier, as well as Nico Hischier, as well as Andre Palat. Defensively, Luke Hughes, Simone Nemec, Dougie Hamilton, all looking pretty good defensively. And in net, Allen, in the absence of Markstrom, has been unbeatable. Very interesting note there. They took down the Sharks. They took down a couple of other very interesting teams, including the Colorado Avalanche in overtime. I know they haven't been the best of teams, but still, this team is clicking. They're on an 8-game winning streak. So, I mean, I don't think I have much choice. The Devils, as of this week, are your number 1 team in the power rankings. Definitely. That's my power rankings as it sits right now. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Do you agree with any of them? Do you disagree with any of them? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. But just to recap, 2 teams fell out of the top 10 last week, and 2 teams went in. The 10th team in the power rankings, which was the Vancouver Canucks, and the 4th team, which is the Detroit Red Wings, both fell out of the power rankings. Although Detroit did only fall into the honorable mention category. Well, the Pittsburgh Penguins were now 10th in the power rankings, and the Utah Mammoth, who were 4th in the power rankings, both went in. So very interesting note there. Just a quick rundown here. Here are my top 10 teams in the power rankings this week. 10th team is Pittsburgh, 9th team is Dallas, 8th team is Vegas, 7th team is Seattle, 6th team is Winnipeg, 5th team is Colorado, 4th team is Utah, 3rd team is Carolina, 2nd team is Montreal, and this week's number 1 power ranking is the New Jersey Devils. So definitely, that's all I'm going to talk for today. I love your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below, and if you agree, disagree, and what would your top 10 be? I love your guys' thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. I'm going to talk for today. I'm going to like this video, and for listening, subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. Also, a blog to news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So I'm going to check that out. I'll link to it in the description below. Can I see you guys all for next video? See you guys soon.